We are the people of God. We are a chosen race and a royal priesthood and a holy nation. We are a people for God's own possession. When the nations rage against God, it's not as though they can ascend his holy hill and fight with him. When the nations rage against God, it's not as though they can lay hold of him. The old folks used to say, your arms are too short to box with God. How do the nations fight God? The answer is they can't fight God per se. So what they do is they fight God's people. They go to war with the church. If you are at war with God, who is a spirit and doesn't have a body like man, then what do? You go to war with those who represent him. You go to war with those who speak his words. You go to war with those who bear the marks of identifying with him. We see this war spiritually and ideologically. We see it even in our own surroundings. And when I talk about this, I'm not talking about in atheistic nations that were at war with the idea of Christianity. That's not what I mean. I don't mean in Islamic nations that are obviously at war with the idea of Christianity, or Hindu nations or Buddhist nations. I'm talking about in the Christian West. We're seeing this war beginning to rage. As the biblical understanding of manhood and womanhood and human sexuality is referred to in legislation as mythology, we are at war. Our mission is also a direct affront to man's quest for independence and his own sovereignty. What is our mission? Jesus gave it to us. He says, all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. There's problem number one. Man is seeking after authority, and there's none to be found because it all belongs to Christ. Go therefore and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and the Son and of the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all that I've commanded you. And behold, I am with you always, even to the end of the age. He doesn't just say, go and baptize people and bring people into the church where they do church things and leave it there. No, he says go and baptize them in the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit, and then teach them to observe. Teach who? The nations. Teach them that they don't get to call their own shots. Teach them that there is a God in Zion and that they have an obligation to bow before him and to obey him. Let's look at these four movements in the psalm. In the first three verses, we see that sinful man is at war with God. And if you don't believe this, you are incredibly naive. If you think that sinful man can just coexist with God, if you think that sinful man can just wink and nod and watch God's people go and do and be who they are and proclaim the gospel and win and gain ground and be okay with it, you are sorely mistaken. Look at those first three verses again. Why do the nations rage and the peoples plot in vain? The kings of the earth set themselves, and the rulers take counsel together against the Lord and against his anointed, saying, let us burst their bonds apart and cast away their cords from us. We don't want them to control us. It's like a child looking up defiantly and saying, you're not the boss of me. Nations rage, peoples plot. Kings set themselves, rulers take counsel together. There is a sense in which the whole world, and yes, it is the whole world outside of this people of God is at war with God. Notice the word picture here. There's a picture of the peoples of the world assembling against God, amassing their armies, if you will, against God, preparing all the firepower they have to go to war against God, and actually believing that if enough of them amass, that they can stamp him out. This would have been significant for the nation of Israel as they thought about that tiny strip of land that has been fought over for generation after generation after generation, fighting with the Philistines and the Assyrians and the Babylonians, and again and again and again, nations amassing against the people of God. In this case, however, the armies are finite men coming to fight against God himself. This is a fool's errand because it's not possible to win. Their armies have no chance. Nevertheless, they amass for war. We see it all the time, don't we? Sometimes I look at people's lives and I watch them war with God, and you just want to look at them and say, stay down, man. But why? Why does sinful man insist on warring with God? As crazy as that sounds. John gives us a glimpse in John 3:19. This is the judgment. The light has come into the world, and people love darkness rather than light because their deeds were evil. They can't help it. They love darkness, and they're infuriated by light, by anything that exposes their darkness. And they are enemies of God. Ephesians chapter 2, verses 1 through 3. We know these verses, don't we? And you were dead in your trespasses and sins in which you once walked, following the course of this world, following the prince of the power of the air, the spirit that is now at work in the sons of disobedience, among whom we once lived in the passions of our flesh, carrying out the desires of the body and the mind, and were by nature children of wrath like the rest of mankind. Enemies of God, children of wrath, who love the darkness and hate the light, and therefore all we can do is continue to go to war with God. It's kind of like the classic story about the frog and the scorpion. Y'all know this story. Scorpion's trying to get across the river and he needs some help. He talks to the frog and says, man, why don't you give me a ride? The frog says, I'm not going to do that. You'll sting me and kill us both. He said, no, I won't do that. I got to get to the other side. Just give a brother a ride. I promise. Halfway across, the frog feels the sting in his back, and before he succumbs and sinks, he looks up to the scorpion and says, but why? To which the scorpion responds, it's just my nature. That's fallen man. It's just his nature to be at war with God. And it will always be his nature until the bitter end.